Hello, everyone. Santo here, and today I want to talk about a topic I'm going to call it opportunity cost because that's technically what I'm referring to, but I need to explain where I'm coming from. So, way back, I don't know, some while ago, closer to like 2012-ish, 2011, I don't remember exactly, but I'm talking around myself. Guild Wars 2 does not have energy. Now, if you're looking at the gameplay right now, this is Guild Wars 1. It has energy. It's that blue bar above my skill bar towards the bottom half of the screen, or along the bottom edge of the screen. You can see a row of 8 skills, and then above that there's a blue bar kind of on the right side. And that is energy. In Guild Wars 1, energy is a resource that you use for mini skills. It's consumed as a cost to use the skill. So there will be some number of skills on my bar that have kind of a blue dot and some number next to them, which is how much energy costs to use. So energy is a mechanic in Guild Wars 1, but when you get to Guild Wars 2, it's not a thing. There are some of the classes, professions, whatever you want to call them, and it do have energy-like mechanics, do have this sort of resource mechanic. It's basically analogous to like mana, but they called it energy instead, because why not? It's what it basically is. And so something happened between Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2. So for those kind of unfamiliar, when they transitioned from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2, they being ArenaNET, they wanted to really experiment and really challenge a lot of their preconceived notions. Are these things actually things that we want? Are these good ideas? Or a different way we can do this? And so they really iterated on a lot of different ideas. They really experimented around with a lot of stuff. And as part of their experimentation, one of the things that they decided to add was energy potions. Now, in Guild Wars 1, the only way to restore energy, there's basically 2 ways to kind of give yourself more energy. One of them is to use skills that give you more energy. The other is to use gear that gives you more maximum energy. And if you need a sudden burst of energy, you can, for example, use some sort of item set that has less energy and then switch to one that has more energy, and you'll get a chunk of energy with the additional energy cap. It's just how the game works. So, Guild Wars 1 doesn't really have, like, energy management's a big part of the game, basically. So with Guild Wars 2, they decided, hey, let's try, as they're kind of iterating on developing it, they thought, let's try adding energy potions. And what they discovered, which is perhaps kind of obvious in retrospect, but, it's one of those things that may not be obvious looking ahead, is that it made energy completely worthless. Like, you basically just, whenever your energy gets low, you pop an energy potion. It basically makes energy kind of, there's no point in it. This is in contrast to other types of RPGs, which do have energy potions, often called like ethers and things like that. So in those games, what you have with that sort of item is you have it takes something to use the item, right? Because they're not real time, it takes your turn to use the potion to restore your energy, your mana, more likely probably, MP, whatever you want to call it, magic points. So there are other games that have done energy potion type things. So for example, in Dark Souls 3, you have the Ashen Estus Flask, but this has an activation time. So I'm guessing that which is a serious cost, right? It's the same sort of cost to use as the in terms of middle of combat, right? As the potion in, say, a Final Fantasy game or something. So if they just had an inventory item that you just double click and boom, you get energy, then that would in fact completely trivialize the existence of energy. Now, as I've just alluded to, there are ways to address this. One of them is to not use energy potions. The other is to introduce some sort of other restriction to using them. So things that I've discussed already, things like activation time or a cooldown where you can't just spam it or whatever. But what they decided instead was, let's just get rid of energy as a mechanic entirely. Now, I don't agree with that idea from a design standpoint. Not that you can't do it. There are, in fact, plenty of games that don't have an energy, although they usually have something. that you have to manage. But the issue with getting rid of energy is energy provides a very important service to your game, I guess I'll say, from a design standpoint, in that it interacts. So it makes your skills interact with each other, is what I'm saying here. It provides an avenue where these skills interact. So if I use skill A, then that uses, say, 10 energy, then skill B uses 10 energy. My use of skill A is going to decrease the number of times I can use skill B. This is in contrast to something like Pokemon that has power points. Power points are serving the same sort of idea, right, of a limited number of uses, but you don't take from a combined power point pool whenever you use a skill in Pokemon. Each one is registered separately. So that's its own sort of thing, right? So what you have going on, and it's actually Dark Souls 1, for example, what your resource there was the number of skills or spell slots with attunement for your magic. And in that game, each spell slot would give you some X number of uses. Dark Souls 2 worked the same way. Dark Souls 3, however, has FP, I think they called it. And that's a common pool then, so it means like different things for how your skills are working and sort of interacting. So if you use a lot of one spell, all of a sudden you can't really use any of your other spells either. So this is a very different way of sort of trying to balance these systems. And so what the energy system does is it lets your skills interact with each other on this angle. It makes energy management a part of your game, which you may or may not want. On the other hand, they introduce stamina for dodge rolling, so you do have stamina management, so it's not like they don't want you to manage something, right? And like I said, a number of professions have had energy-like mechanics on them. Thief and Revenant, notably. So what you kind of end up having is you lose that sort of level of interaction, and what they said they were going to kind of balance things against each other. And it removes a point of control, or I want to call it a tuning knob, that you can kind of adjust how good the skill is. And this gets me into a whole other debate about Guild Wars 1 having very limited number of energy counts, which I have issues with, but that's another discussion for another time. So what they said they were going to do instead is balance their skills around an opportunity cost. Now, this is something that I thought about, or have thought about since, to kind of think about what would it take to actually develop an opportunity cost system that's compelling and engaging and etc. Now, what we ended up getting when Guild Wars 2 first came out, back in 2012 apparently, it's what I think it was, is opportunity cost meant this skill has a really long cooldown and a short period where it's active. So the idea behind an opportunity cost, as they described, I forget where I saw them talk about it. It's been a long time. But ArenaNET was basically describing at the time that an opportunity cost would basically be like, you have to try to figure out when's the best time to use your skill. If you use it now, you can't use it later, and it might be a better moment, right? So there's kind of this whole idea of, the idea is when is the best time to use a skill to kind of get the effect. And so the idea of opportunity cost, then, is what it really means is you have to try to judge what moments are the best moments to use your skills optimally to be able to get good effect out of them. And if you miss that chance, then your skill is kind of wasted in a way, if that makes sense. And what that ended up translating to, like I said, was really long recharges. And kind of what that ended up doing to the game is it kind of put you on a lot of auto-attacking. But the other thing that ended up happening is that they didn't really set up a system of opportunities. And without an opportunity system, what it really boiled down to, in most of my experience, at least for most enemies, is use your damage skills on recharge, use your heal skill as you needed. That's the basic pattern. So the challenge here is, what actually makes for a compelling opportunity cost system? What makes it so that way you need to understand the opportunity to use certain skills? And what you end up doing, let's kind of work through this mental exercise, right? So the first thing that we need to just discover is what is an opportunity? What makes something an opportunity that we can try to say our skills need to be devised around this? Now, the immediate one that comes to mind is maybe there's some timing elements, right? That's a common type of opportunity, right? Is there's some sort of window in which you can do something, and if you miss that window, then your skill is not as effective. Guild Wars 1 actually had this in the form of interrupts. So if you perform some sort of action, you could interrupt your opponent's action, which would then, not be great for them. So the thing is, if you missed the window of their skill activation, then you effectively wasted your interrupt until it had finished cooling down. So this is one avenue that you can take. But I think that there can be other ones as well. So, like, there's just different states. For example, just like not just activating skills, but like enemies can be at different states. There can be things of like, if you perform this sort of skill at this time, it's much more effective. What I'm thinking of, for example, is like counterattacks. There's a lot of back and forth play. So like I think of Dark Souls parry systems and counterattack systems where if you hit the enemy with attacks as they're like performing stuff, it like interrupts them, or it deals more damage, as a counter hit. But there can be, a lot of it does come down to timing, and it does come down to that. But I think there can also be systems where it toggles stuff with your skills potentially. When you do a certain thing, or maybe if you use your skill in a certain way, its recharge is lowered, for example. So imagine you have a damage skill that, does a nice chunk of damage and then cools down for a while, but if you hit the enemy, say, in a specific way, its recharge is lowered, right? That's a potential way of doing it. Or you could do something where, say, your other skills get, recharged more quickly or something if you use a certain skill a certain way. Or maybe you have some sort of buff that's on you, and if you do something, there's some way that you can keep that buff going if you time stuff right. Maybe you can have a profession that has rhythm game elements to it in this sort of way, where you can kind of do stuff with if you do this sort of rhythm, then the effect becomes more powerful if you manage to hit the rhythm. Like, I would suck at it because I have no rhythm. Anybody who's been watching the Hollow Knight playthrough with the Crusher sections can attest to that. But just these ideas of what is an opportunity, how can we create opportunities, how can we have skills interact with them in engaging in interesting ways. Maybe it's something like, if this enemy is flying, like flies up in the air when you use this skill, it grounds them. So maybe it's like, yeah, this is some sort of damage, standard damage skill, but if you spam it just to get more damage in against an enemy that flies, you're going to waste the chance to be able to use it to ground them. Like, there can be effects like that where this is specifically set up to counter certain things. Or maybe even something like, if you use this skill, it does something to another paired skill on your bar. So, for example, it might flip it to another effect, or it might disable it for a while. I like the idea of flipping it to another effect, actually. So it's like, if you use this skill, it flips the skill to another effect, and that might be a really useful effect, but it might be that the original face would be more useful in a certain situation. So you have to kind of figure out these systems to make it so that way you have weird interplays between your skills potentially. And I think that's part of what I'd want with an opportunity cost system, is that taking one opportunity costs me another. And that's another approach to take with it, right? So if we kind of think about this path, then in combat, if I start going into a certain sort of chain of action X, it might make it so that way I can't go chain of action Y. And so perhaps I mess up my opportunities with that Y could have gone in. Or maybe I need to figure out when to use skills to transition between two different paths like that. So kind of what I'm getting at here is I feel like an opportunity cost system to really be engaging needs to be really creative. You really need to brainstorm. You need to understand, why is it a cost? What is an opportunity? And how are you going to balance things in this system? What I fundamentally have come down to when I've thought about these things, as you can tell right now, is that this is a lot of work. A lot of work to be able to figure out how to balance it. And I just don't see how that's preferable to having an energy system that can work as a backbone pacing mechanic for your game. Because that's what energy was in Guild Wars 1. It was a pacing mechanic for combat. Because in general, there was no way, like, you could make your build, but then you're spending skills and other things on trying to energy manage. And so what you'd have is, this is your energy regen, and there's like no way to really increase your energy. There's no way to increase your energy regen without using specific skills to get around your inbuilt energy regeneration rate. And so that would set the pace of play because of energy access. And so, like, there would be other things that you try to do to get around it. So using skills that don't cost energy, like signets, for example, that have perhaps longer activation times, or more vulnerable to interrupts and other things happening. But it serves as a backbone to the pace of play. It creates an interaction between your skills. It gives you another point to tune and tweak for balance. So I don't know why they decided, I know we should get rid of it when energy potions negated the usefulness of energy. I don't know why they thought opportunity cost would be a good thing to try to balance with. And my thought exercises has proven to be significantly more complicated to try to figure out how to make work in a compelling and interesting way. And I don't know. It strikes me as a very strange decision. And I would like to be able to go and like talk to them of like, so you added energy potions and that invalidated energy. So why was your solution to that to be let's eliminate energy? Like, what did you think you were gaining by doing that? Because that's the thing, is I feel like you lose a lot going that direction, and I don't see what you gain going that direction. And because, like, a lot of combat systems need some sort of resource management. Because otherwise, well, the reason why I say that is because I feel like it allows you to be able to have powerful skills that are kind of limited, but don't feel as limited, if that makes sense. So I don't know. There's so many different things I could kind of try to talk about in some of that direction. But the game that I keep thinking of actually is Middle-earth: Shadow of War, which ostensibly actually does have. It has 2 resources for you to manage, aside from your health, obviously. The first one is your ammo for your bow. Which is limited. Like, you have ways of refreshing it, but you have to, I mean, to some extent, you have to pick what skills are you going to do. Like, how are you going to build your character so that way you can refresh your ammo in combat versus having to run off to find an ammo refill. Shadow of War is a lot better balanced in terms of arrow count than the Shadow of Mordor was. Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, it was really easy to just like refresh your arrows and then go on shooting streaks that would get you high enough combo count to be able to refresh your arrows and kind of like perpetually keep yourself in ridiculous overpowered loops. Shadow of War is a lot better in terms of balance in that regard. And you're just super powerful in other ways. But you also have focus in that game, which is a resource that you spend. You can spend it on a couple of different things, but in Shadow of War. But one of the things that you spend it on is slowdown for aiming with your bow. And so, like, even that game has these resources when you step back, it's like, does it really have resource management? But yeah, it does. It has these meters that you're trying to balance, your ammo and your focus, and these are resources that you're attending to. Like, first-person shooters have ammo for their guns usually. You have these things that you're trying to figure out. How are you, and there can be interplay between stuff, like, but it's all, what do you give up to gain this other thing, or what are you giving up? Like, what is the balance point? What is the tipping point? And I feel like the big problem that I have with Guild Wars 2 is that they got rid of energy and they didn't really replace it very well with something. And I don't know how things are 100% with the game at this point, because I've not really looked into it. I don't know how well they've done with some of the expansion content of making the enemies more engaging to battle, which is one of my bigger issues, quite frankly, with a game that I would love to be able to love, but just find boring. But especially with that initial design, like, I felt like energy was taken out, and there's nothing really there to kind of replace what it was trying to do, or what it actually did. Which was to give you a reason to build, like, to consider skills differently, and not just gravitate towards the skill that has, like, the best DPS, or, you know, that sort of thing. So, anyway, I've probably gone on long enough, and I'm sure that I could talk more. I'd love to have discussion about this. Like, what do you think about opportunity cost? Like, what do you think would make for a compelling opportunity cost system? What is an opportunity? How can you lose it? How can you gain it? What does it mean to have opportunity cost be the point of balance? And, like, what does opportunity cost in a skill sense even mean to you? Because, like, I know what it means to me, which is the idea that if you can lose the opportunity if you don't do things quite right. Or you can lock yourself in. Like, it's basically, it costs you an opportunity to use the skill, right? But what does it mean to you, and how does that practically play out to you? I'd be curious to know. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. And until next time, everyone, take care. Bye-bye.